Welcome to the Lockdown Philosophy School. I am Peter Greenfield, and my favourite philosopher is Edmund Husserl. So let me begin by telling you a bit about the life of Edmund Husserl. He was born in Prosnitz in Moravia, which is in what is nowadays the Czech Republic, in 1859. He studied astronomy in Leipzig, and then after that continued his studies in mathematics, physics and philosophy in Berlin. He did a PhD in mathematics in Vienna, and then started to focus more solely on the study of philosophy with Franz Brentano, who would go on to have a strong influence on his work. He continued to work in the academy until his retirement, and would go on to become professor in Freiburg in 1916, retiring in 1928. It should be said that he was born to Jewish parents, and because of the rise of Hitler in the last years of his life, he became rather isolated and humiliated, despite the fact that he had converted to Protestantism. He died in 1938, shortly before the Second World War. So the idea of Edmund Husserl's, which I want to talk about today, is intentionality. So, let me ask the question, what is intentionality? Well, think of the word from which it comes, intention. I intend to play football, I intend to go outside. If you're intending something, you're determined that something should happen, you want it to happen, you're aiming towards it happening. So, if we're talking about intentionality in Husserl's terms, or in philosophical terms, we're talking about being intentional towards what we experience in the world. So, we are directed towards the objects we sense in the world. I see that car over there because I am intentional, I am directed towards it. The same may be true if I hear a dog bark. My sense of hearing is directed towards hearing the dog bark. Let me give you an example. So you may remember in physics, you'd see those diagrams of a light travelling into the eye, and it would tell you there'd be a line between the light and the eye, and it would ask you what direction the light would be travelling in, and the arrow, if you got the answer right, the arrow should be pointing towards the eye. Now Husserl wouldn't necessarily want to deny that light travels in that direction, but he would want to say that we also must be travelling in terms of our senses in the opposite direction, towards the light or towards objects from which light are emitted. Another way of putting intentionality is like this. We all have consciousness, but we are always conscious of something. And consciousness is very important for Husserl, which I will go on to explain why. We're never purely conscious. We're always conscious of that dog barking, or that car which we see, or that memory which we have. So let us locate intentionality within the wider philosophy, or the wider system of Husserl's thought. So Husserl started a discipline with the term he called Phenomenology. Now this term is found in the writings of Kant and Hegel, but it was Husserl who really started the discipline of Phenomenology. Other writers who were phenomenologists involved in the discipline of phenomenology and continued the tradition were Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Jean-Luc Marion, and Michel Henry. So what is phenomenology? And what is common to all of these writers in what they're studying? Well, phenomenology is a study of our experience of the world as the world appears to us. And for Husserl, it was our ego, our self, which was transcendental. And by the word transcendental, I mean necessary. So the existence of the self was necessary for experience. And Husserl's method in establishing intentionality within his phenomenology was coined by the term epoch, which means bracketing. Man is bracketed from the world. So the self is bracketed from the world, made separate from the world. But I've used the word world, and the word world is slightly misleading. Husserl is concerned, in being a phenomenologist, with our experience of phenomena, objects as they appear to us. He does not hold to the existence or non-existent of an external, or to use Kant's terms, noumenal world. So he's unlike Immanuel Kant in this sense. But in being concerned about phenomena, he was concerned about what we experienced, whether it seemed to exist externally or internally. So a phenomenon could include a football stadium, a pain in the foot, a headache, or a unicorn in one's imagination. So a man imagining a unicorn. What is common to all of these experiences that I've just outlined is that the individual would have intentionality towards them. Such conscious intentionality would be necessary or transcendental for the experience. It's worth me dwelling on the thought of Immanuel Kant for a bit longer, because Immanuel Kant was particularly important for Husserl, as he's been important for so many other philosophers in the last 2 centuries. So for Kant, in his thought and what Kant thinks of human experience, for Kant, we experience the world as it appears to us, not the world as it actually is in itself. And Kant, in his theory of how we have knowledge of the world, posited there is a noumenal and a phenomenological world. So, as we've been discussing in phenomena, that is, as the world appears to us. So the phenomenological world is our experience of the world as the world appears to us, whereas the noumenal world is the external world as it is in itself. And for Kant, that world is unknowable. We cannot have any direct experience of the noumenal, external world. So for Kant, our experience of the noumenal world is distorted by the way we perceive the world, by our senses, and that distortion gives us phenomena, the phenomenological world. So the phenomenological world is the world as it appears to us. Whereas for Husserl, we see phenomena as they really are. And so there's no split between the noumenal and the phenomenological world. And as we have seen, he suspends the question of whether the world exists. So for Husserl, we do not see a representation of the world in our experience. We see or sense objects as they really are. I want to now talk about the role of language in intentionality and in Husserl's understanding of how we experience the world. So the question might be asked that if it is phenomena that we see and not necessarily an external world, how come there apparently appears to be an external world which we all refer to and have a common experience of. This is where language comes in. Language gives us an ability to speak about what we experience. It unifies our experience of the world and of phenomena that we talk about. And it helps us to construct the external world. It gives us a common reference point when talking about our experience, but it also helps us to separate objects in the world. So the fact that I can talk about a road and a pavement gives me the opportunity to separate those two objects in my language of what I'm talking about. Husserl also makes a distinction in terms of what we experience in our intentionality. He distinguishes between the noemetic core and the full noema. So the noemetic core is what the object is in itself. So let me give the example of a chocolate bar. So there's a particular type of chocolate bar, a dairy milk, which you might be sharing out between all of your friends. All of you taste the same dairy milk. Whereas the full noema might be its delicious chocolatey taste or its horrible taste to those who don't like chocolate or don't particularly like dairy milk. That is, if you will, the how of its appearing. So everyone would be able to taste the chocolate, the dairy milk, whereas only some people would be impressed by its tastiness or its revoltingness. And this would be particularly important for Husserl's student, Martin Heidegger, who would talk about our perceptions of objects being determined by what we believed we could use them for. So I should probably make another distinction within Husserl's thought and his concept of intentionality, and that is between two concepts, transverse intentionality and longitudinal intentionality. So transverse intentionality is just as I've been explaining. So that car over there, I have transverse intentionality towards through looking at it. Whereas with longitudinal intentionality, that unites my sequential viewing of that car. So that car may just about to reverse out of the drive. So my longitudinal intentionality unites the sequences of what I experience as the car moves, it turns back, it goes sideways, and it drives off at the road into the distance. So as I've explained, within Husserl and his concept of intentionality, there is this nice balance between what unites our experience and separates the different aspects of our experience. And that is why, or that is one of the reasons why I find him such a pleasurable philosopher to study and to read. My thank you to the Lockdown Philosophy School for this opportunity to teach you all about Husserl. I hope you've been able to take something from it. I should say that Husserl is a very difficult person to read and interpret. You may well have got that sense through this video. But we're always discovering more and more about Husserl. His works are still being translated and aren't all available yet. So, in conclusion, do look at our other videos and keep an eye out for those yet to come.